Good afternoon, good morning, good night. I'm Blackbright, and I'm talking about the Jamaican deportees. I did promise you a video about how I felt about the money that's exchanging hands between governments. And it's very difficult doing these videos because you're not quite sure what is fact, what's made up, the fabrication, what's manipulated by the media, what people's vested interest in why they share information. So it's very difficult. What I try to do is extract information from various videos and see what I can extract that makes sense to me, that builds a picture that helps me to understand exactly what is happening. Now, the first thing I heard was that the Jamaican government received $5 million. Now, I don't know if that's $5 million. I don't know if it's £5 million. The person was very vague. But this was for a Jamaican campaign. I've also been led to believe that the Jamaicans signed a Deportee Agreement that they can't get out of, which entitles them to get $20,000 per deportee. And out of that, I understand $700 is meant to go to the deportee to rehabilitate him. I don't know if that agreement is set in stone or whether it's up to the government's discretion. I also know that there is an organisation called the National Organisation of Migrant Deportees that's been set up to welcome, in quotes, deportees. But all of that comes with restrictions, and it's not straightforward at all. To start off with, the deportees, allegedly, when they come through customs, they're supposed to pick up a C-27 form. That C-27 form is supposed to allow them tax-free shipment of their personal possessions from the UK back to Jamaica. How many of them know about that? How many of them even go through customs? Last thing I saw when the plane landed, they was far away on an airstrip at the bottom. The police surrounded them and took them off and whizzed them off to Hiram Barracks. Now, I don't know if they go through customs there. I don't know if they're told about the C-27 form. I don't know if they know anything about it. All I know is that they've got 6 months in order to claim. Also, with regard to the NODM, they've obviously been financed. The gentleman I saw who was running the NODM was a white guy. He wasn't even a white Jamaican. I don't know what nationality he was, because at that time I didn't really take much notice. I remember thinking, he's not Jamaican, and it's a white guy running this thing, even though they have a black face for the public. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Now, when these deportees go to the National Organisation of Deported Migrants, those migrants are meant to, in order to get the benefits from them, which is advice, which is temporary housing, see if they can get jobs, that kind of stuff, reintegration into the Jamaican society. They have to show their birth certificate and they have to have a passport. Now, when you think that these deportees would have been detained in prison for over a year or possibly longer, how are they going to, number one, their passport would have been confiscated by the British government. How are they supposed to have their birth certificate? When I tried to get a dual passport, when I came to Jamaica, based on the fact that both my parents are Jamaican, I had a hard time. I couldn't even get it in the end. They wanted to know my mother's, all my mother's details I more or less knew. I knew my father's details, which was fine. Not only did they want to know the date of birth of your parents, both parents, but you also was meant to know where they went to school. What area they were raised in. Not only that, your grandparents. Now, I knew my grandmother's name, but I didn't know my grandfather's name because he died before my grandmother came to the UK. And so I wouldn't have had any information on him. And on top of that, they wanted me to know where she was raised. And also when they got married. And then it turns out, even when I gave them the name, my grandparents weren't even married, and I didn't know that. So I'd given them the wrong name for my grandmother's last name. I thought it was Brown, but it wasn't. And because of that, they turned down my application. I paid all that money and I didn't get my passport. Oh, I'm saying that because these people who don't have any documentation, I know, especially the ones who've spent a lot of time in Britain, how are they supposed to know all that information? It's not as if, our parents give us their family history. They don't. A lot of parents, because of, things that have happened in their past, they're very secretive. I remember being raised at a time where they said, don't talk your business. And like they never said, don't talk your business to strangers. They didn't talk their business even within the family. So there's a lot of things we didn't know about our parents. So somebody who's being deported to Jamaica and who wants their papers, or who wants a new passport and wants to be reintegrated in Jamaica, how are they supposed to get it? And that's where the system falls down, because these people will not benefit from the support network if they don't have this documentation. Now, if everything was above board, surely a representative would go into the deportation or detention centre, give the people their birth certificates or give them what they need to be reintegrated in Jamaica or whichever country. I'm talking about Jamaica because my parents are from Jamaica and because the Titan flight took 29 Jamaicans just over a week ago. I know it's happening in Africa, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, all over, but I'm dealing with Jamaicans right now. So when they're expected to have these documentations and then they're not giving it and then they don't have it, how is that situation left? They're only going to do so much to help that person, and I bet it's based on the type of person that they're relating to, because everybody has their biases. It's really, really not a good thing. And the thing is, it's when you're thinking about the crimes they committed. Yes, they're talking about, the media says a plane load of convicts or convict flight or something, blowing it all out of proportion. Some of these deportees have committed driving offences. Some have been carrying weed. I know weed is illegal, but they've had weed. But I don't believe that driving offences and carrying weed should be a deportable offence. I know it's illegal, but they should be able to use their discretion. If they're murderers, rapists, have weapons, been caught with weapons, battery, robbery, all that kind of stuff, serious criminals. And, to me, that is what I call serious crime. But the way it works is that there was one guy who gave his testimony after he was deported. He was in Jamaica. He was in detention for 9 months. He got a 9-month sentence. When the 9 months was up, they asked him some questions, and because they didn't like his answers, they detained him for a further 3 months. So he hit the criteria for deportation, and then they deported him. So, there's a lot of corruption going on. When people are stopping black men in the streets, from they have an accent, they find the slightest little thing wrong, they're going to ship them off to the detention centre. And the thing with the detention centre, as opposed to the prisons, is that with a prison, at least you know how long you've got. With a detention centre, you don't have to go through the courts and all of that kind of stuff. It's a quick way to say, OK, we're going to leave you there until we get things sorted out. So they leave them there for a year or so, just enough time to get them deported afterwards. And these people, the conditions are abominable, I hear. And it's just not fair. I heard one woman was murdered. People are murdered, but I heard a woman was murdered in the detention centre. And these detention centres are run by private contractors. They're not run by the government. So these people aren't accountable. It's a money-making scheme. So not only do you have the Jamaican government receiving money, you've got the private contractors receiving money. It's all collusion and corruption. And then, and the media is twisting it to turn Jamaican heads against the deportees. There's not much that needs to be said, because I know if I was in Jamaica, if I was a Jamaican and I heard a plane load of convicts were coming, I'd be horrified. Especially when you think about the crime, and the murders and everything that's been going on of late in Jamaica. I wouldn't want to know that we've got a load of convicts coming over. But what they don't know is what's behind it. They don't know that the government's been paid to accept them. They don't know that a lot of these deportees are not big, big criminals. And they're not being given a second chance. You know what comes to mind? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. How many of you have done a driving offence? How many of you have walked around with weed? A little bit more than what you should have. Some men, I think a guy was in there for domestic violence. He's been deported. And I don't condone domestic violence at all. But that's another thing that any one of these men watching this video could be guilty of. And you could be deported. This guy was listening. I was listening to this guy on a video, and he was saying, oh, well, you should do the right thing. You shouldn't go and get yourself into trouble. You shouldn't go to this country and get yourself in trouble, But they forget that, it's so irritating. These little do-gooders, anyone can get into trouble. Anyone can have a bad day. But is it a deportable offence? That is my point. I just think it's sad. I mean, if everything was above board, the thing is that if you've been in prison for more than a year, I mean, there's a lot of lawyers jumping on the bandwagon and they want to try and get people off. But if you've been in prison for more than a year, you are deportable, because as far as they're concerned, you're not conducive to public good. So if you've been in prison, if you've been detained for over a year, not just in prison, but in one of these detention centres for over a year, you are deportable. You're eligible for deportation. They'll tell you that you're eligible for deportation, and then you will be deported at the end of the sentence, unless you've got somebody intervening who can speak on your behalf. Then you can apply after 10 years to come back into the country if you wish. If you've been detained for more than 4 years, it's guaranteed, more or less, that you will be deported. No negotiation, nothing, and there's no return date. So depending on the offence, well, the offence will determine. So to me, it would appear to me that those who have done a 4-year sentence are the ones that should be deported, because 4 years to me implies a very serious crime. But it's not working like that. It's not working like that at all. And yes, people are saying, if you've done something wrong, you shouldn't have done something wrong. You shouldn't have jumped a light. You shouldn't have... There's lots of things. You shouldn't have been walking with weed when you know it's illegal. It's fine for people to say these things, but they can happen. They can happen. Not everybody is perfect. So that's the situation. I think I've covered everything. I've written down a couple of things here. Yeah, I think I've covered most stuff. What can we do? We just have to hope that and pray that, justice will prevail. There's bound to be a knock-on effect, and, there will be... I don't even know if it's worth these people. You've got people petitioning and shouting and saying, oh, these people have been here all these years. The thing is that the immigration law, even though it's recent, states that if you commit a crime and you've been inside for over a year, you're going to be deported. So what's the point in all this ranting and raving? You know, yes, they don't have any family abroad. Yes, they've been here from then 3 to 5. But it's usually a series of crimes they've committed and they are in the wrong. So they have to accept some responsibility. The thing what I don't like is the fact that the money and the collusion and the corruption, that's what I don't like. If it was all above board, if it wasn't a money-making entity, then I wouldn't have to speak on this. But it's the fact that it's all about money. It's all greed. And, you know, the deportees, they're supposed to get, I think, 700 quid. I don't know if they get 700 quid. They're supposed to be rehabilitated. I don't know if they're being rehabilitated. And I don't think they can be rehabilitated if they don't have the paperwork. That is my point. So I think it's really, really upsetting when people are not doing what they're meant to do. And that is my point. Anyway, that's all for now. Bye-bye.